wanted to welcome you to my podcast, Dr. Krystal Culler, who is a holistic brain health expert with many years of experience. And she's the founder of the Virtual Brain Health Center and a creative leader as well. So let's start with the basics, Krystal. Why don't you tell us about the Virtual Brain Health Center, what you do there, what your mission is there, and then hopefully we can get into the nitty gritty and talk about brain health.
Thank you so much for having me today. The Virtual Brain Health Center, our mission is simple. We strive to share brain care for all. For anyone with the brain is who our services are for. We've seen projects from kids to older adults to caregivers to workplace wellness programs. So we've been very fortunate that our conversation today seems to pique a lot of people's interest on what is brain health and what can we do about it. Specifically, we're an online space where people can come and learn the brain health science, and then what can they do today to start taking care of and prioritize their own brain for themselves, their loved ones, and their communities. And we've been very fortunate to grow to an international reach, about over 100 countries. And so we're on the mission. I'm going to say officially on your podcast, we want to serve 100,000 brilliant brains in 10 years. And so we're on the path of that's what's guiding our work. So opportunities like this where we can talk brain health with everyone, we welcome that. So thank you so much for having me today.
I think what you're doing is excellent. And as an internist, I do see my fair share of dementia. And obviously, as you're already aware, Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. And when I was training and as a young doctor, Alzheimer's and dementia wasn't so much on my radar because I was younger at that time. My parents were younger, and perhaps I even saw a younger demographic than I do now. That has all changed. I've been in practice for 24 years. I've had patients who are growing older with me, and that is something that I am not only dealing with on a personal level, but also on a professional level. So why is brain health such an important part of our overall well-being?
I appreciate what you shared, because I think if you and I would have talked even 10 years ago, this conversation would look completely different. When I first entered the field and in graduate school in 2010, 2012 years, it was still the idea that brain health is for the elite and healthy, meaning you don't have a chronic brain health condition, not a neurodegenerative disease, not a mental health condition or chronic health. And if many of us probably reflect back, then who's left? I know at least in my inner circle, in my family, if we went through any of those, there's not one person, but yet now we recognize brain health is our whole health. It's for every single person. And the conversation really has shifted. And I think that's been the interesting part to study, at least for me, was even in the mid 2015 was where there was a lot of the first sort of some national surveys, even dating back to 2008, international surveys about perceptions of brain health. What do people think? What do they know? And still today, the surveys we do come to the same conclusion. Brain health is a top brain health concern or concern for adults. Typically, it's either ranked number 1 or number 2 next to heart health. But luckily, all of the advancements we made in the heart health conversations, most of us seem to know what's good for the heart. It's good for the brain, or that type of sentiment. So it's raised awareness there. And I think that's the exciting piece is we had this level of awareness, we had this interest, and yet survey after survey, over half of people, up to 70 or 80% of people just don't know what to do. So we had the information, we know the science, but we're missing that translation piece. So much like you said, how does this relate to me or the patient I'm serving that's right in front of me today of what can they do to take care of their brain? And excited to continue that conversation with you today on at least what's the science say, but the empowering message is there's a lot that we all could do, and that brain health is for every single one of us. So to bust that myth that it might not have been for you or your loved one, now everyone's called into this conversation to take care of and prioritize their own brilliant brain.
And you brought up heart health. The same or the similar risk factors for heart disease are also the similar risk factors or the same risk factors for dementia as well. Obviously, there's more to it, though, because there has been such a focus on heart disease in the United States. But you would think that the same treatments that we're targeting for heart disease would also improve brain health. But I'm not necessarily seeing that with patients. What is your experience with that?
Yes, we had a great report that came out midsummer from the latest Lancet Commission report that shows what are the 14 lifestyle factors that have enough science behind them that if we target can mitigate 45% of global dementia cases across the world. And so each time they're identifying new risk factors and we're able to account for almost half of dementia cases. 45% is a high number, but I think to walk it through is to share your sentiment is there these different buckets. And the first one is managing long-term health conditions, which your blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, depression, obesity, all risk factors and things that you manage under heart disease to be aware of. They've really expanded in the last, I think, 3 reports of the Lancet Commission to focus on sensory health, which I knew when I trained under cognitive psychology, we knew your senses can mimic cognitive decline. But now there's enough research to say you have to correct your vision and treat any hearing impairments to help mitigate those risks for you later in life. And then there's this big lifestyle component, I think, to what most people might already be aware of, your quality of your education, much education as you can get early in life and to continue to keep learning. So I suspect your audience that's tuning into the podcast are in that bucket of lifelong learners. But we've seen for years in medical literature that physical inactivity puts you at risk, just as if you were to be smoking. So does social isolation. So all of these come together in the lifestyle of physical inactivity, social isolation, smoking, and excessive alcohol use are the things that we can control and make lifestyle modifications for to support our brain health. And the last two, I think, fall under this environmental component is the air pollution or the air quality we're surrounded by. And then also noting too, traumatic brain injury and what that looks like. And I say that very broadly because it could be a smaller event. It could be long-term exposure to where people are living. And I think we see a lot more of that coming out on the international scale of what are those traumatic brain injuries that people have that may make your brain more vulnerable and susceptible to disease or other health conditions that can impact it. But I hope that in highlighting those 14 people see, there is a lot we can control. And even for these chronic health conditions, it's not so much that you live with that chronic health condition. It's if it's managed well, then it's not so much a risk for you anymore, but it's that chronic disease management for those life conditions that become very important.
Hey everyone, big shout out to Ariel Vivleka, founder of Finally All Natural. Ariel is on a mission to educate people about hidden ingredients in skincare products. Did you know the FDA allows incidental ingredients that aren't labeled or disclosed? That's why Finally All Natural is special. They focus on how ingredients are created, excluding extracts and essential oils, and have world-first formulas that work for a variety of skin types. They've also partnered with CleanHub for eco-friendly packaging and offer an exclusive organic face oil that has been scientifically proven to boost the proteins in your skin, enhancing hydration and strengthening the skin barrier. All 100% vegan. If you're into holistic skincare or non-toxic living, Ariel is your go-to expert. Keep up the amazing work, Ariel. Get in touch with her today. All the links are in description below. And you mentioned previously the myths that you have encountered in your work. Can you share some of the biggest myths that you have encountered?
I think I'll share one just as you've mentioned that your patient population has been aging with you. I'm a trained gerontologist, so I've always studied aging, but we know that perception that we have of our own memory or aging or self-efficacy, how we can manage our chronic health tends to change with age. So for so long, we thought we're not going to have those conversations. We're talking with age more disease states. That has all been blown out of the water. We're talking health span, brain span, longevity. cognitive vitality. There's all these different buzz terms, but to recognize that brain health is for every single person. Just with adults and the lifestyle changes you may make later in life will look different, but the research still shows it gives a cumulative benefit. So some have faster impacts on your health. If you keep yourself hydrated well, within a day or so, you feel better on your cognitive health with exercise after a few weeks of a stable routine. And then you build up this cumulative benefit of this is a solid foundational pillar of my day-to-day life. And these are things I just naturally do. And then you can focus on other areas of your health and well-being. So I like to debunk that if you think the conversation around brain health isn't for you or your loved one, that's the myth. It's for every single one of us, and to recognize it looks different. You might see these lifestyle risk factors, but I also to highlight is I know you're a clinician is your doctor is not going to go in and just give you this checklist and not ask you about diet, sleep, check you for vitamin deficiencies and those types of things, or talk to you about long COVID. There are so many other factors we know that come along, have a strong impact on the brain. It might not be on the risk factor list, but it doesn't mean it's not an important element of your lifestyle that a healthcare provider or a mental health provider isn't going to help target and support for you. I think all of us know how we feel after a terrible night's sleep and trying to function the next day.
Pivoting on the impact of screening. Again, we've done a lot in the world of, let's say, breast cancer, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. But I often feel, and as a primary care physician, I'll let you know that there's a crunch. We're crunched. We have a certain amount of time to spend with patients, but I always feel like we're not doing enough as a healthcare system, as doctors, to screen for brain health. For someone like myself, I understand I'm limited in time, but let's say in a ideal world, what would you advise me?
I've talked with people of all ages, especially adults, as I say, start the conversation with the next healthcare provider. I don't care if it's your cardiologist or your primary care, or maybe you're already under neurology care, but to start the conversation. And I think there's a big movement in the field of brain health for early detection, but trying, to your point, to figure out where in the healthcare system does it. Right now, under your Medicare annual wellness visit, there's a cognitive screening component. Does it happen every time when people are there? Are they doing the brief cog screen where it's 2, 3 questions? Because really, for how long you have with patients, what can you do? Or is there a longer screening tool people use? Who's also providing the screening? But I always encourage people to remember, as the cliche is, the checkup from the neck up is just as important, but to recognize that sometimes your providers, it's not on their level of awareness. They may see you once a year. This is your wellness check. But if you've had an abrupt change and you're noticing changes in your cognition or your attention, focus, memory that are concerning, to disclose that to your providers, because there's a lot of things they can do on the prevention or screening end to, I think, eliminate some of your concerns. If you have a vitamin deficiency, if you have a UTI that you don't know about, there are some quick wins that can be treated. And there's other ones where they say, this isn't part of another conversation. Let's schedule that time and let's get you to that provider, or maybe a nurse educator. There's all these different ways that they can work the system for what you might be saying, but to honor that you start that. Because I think for so many times we think we go in that our physician's just going to go through this checklist for us, and they can't realistically cover everything with every person, but we can give them the insights to the changes we know within our own bodies and brains. We're our own experts, so let's work with our providers, and always encourage everyone to just start the conversation. And you may be pleasantly surprised about the resources and information and support that you can receive and the things you are able to do, rather than to sit with that worry of I'm noticing it, but you're paralyzed and not taking an action step. Your healthcare providers are excellent team members to support you on that.
I often find on the flip side, on the patient side, that when it comes, especially when it comes to dementia, it is so helpful to have a family member there, because then because if that patient is unfortunately cognitively impaired, I may not be getting the full picture of what is really going on because I'm getting it from their eyes, right? Their sense of what's happening, and it can be skewed. So I always advise family members try to be present, even if you can't be there. We can at least communicate by phone or by a televisit where you may be present. It is so helpful. So, how do you advise patients and their family members when it comes to brain health and dementia and how they can provide support to the patients, to the family members that are experiencing issues like dementia?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the projects I've set out to build on our website is we created a brain health directory. Is so people can find these national resources that give you the guide, how to start the conversation about brain health with your primary care physician and lets you have the time to think ahead before you're in that meeting. I think a lot of us, it is a joke, but we do almost get this white coat syndrome when we walk in the room. We forget what we want to say. We have an idea of the issues, but to your point, we maybe forgot to explain the extent of it and how it went further. We'll downplay it, or our blood pressure's high when we get in there, and then that's impacting how we're thinking and speaking and interacting. So how helpful some of those things can be to go in with a list or use some of these guides that say, this is the question I want to ask my provider. I want to ask them about lab work that might be helpful, whatever is on your mind, but you have to put in the time on the front end and that there's spaces where you can write those. And I think the same for the care partner on the other side is they could think about ways. I know when I support my parents in their visits with their providers, it's not so much for me to interject, but to pose the question, was there something else on your mind that you want to share with the doctor? Did we cover your concerns about your brain fog? Do we have a good plan for you to manage if you have a flare up? Or is your prevention plan good? So think of these broader questions that can support your loved one, that they can then have the dialogue and exchange with their provider as well. I'm not saying it's perfect, but finding these different tools and strategies, and there are a lot of guides. And on our directory, there's links to some of those guides. And then there's also links to some online screening tools that people could use. So if you have the concern about your cognition or your brain health, there are some that you can do on the internet. And then you can print out your score and take it to your provider to start that conversation and to know this isn't diagnostic, but it is enough. And it's more than that they would have time to spend with you in that moment. But it's enough that you can say, I've done this. Physician can always look at more information on the assessment of the tool. Here was my screening tool, and then let's have the conversation for more. So I think we're seeing more empowered patients. That balance with Dr. Google, I'm sure you experienced too, but was part of our mission in designing that directory was to direct people to some free resources from reputable institutions in brain health, like our National Institute on Aging, National Institute on Health, and hub that all together so people can go in and find some of these tools. And luckily, they're all free and accessible. So I hope that might give people some action steps of what they can do, because I know the conversation I would go have with my provider about my own brain health looks different than my husband's or my brother-in-law or even my mother's. We all have these overarching goals, but the individualized plan is what we need to take into that meeting, how it relates to, and open up dialogue with providers for support.
I think that would be very valuable, obviously, not only for patients, but for healthcare practitioners, because as we were talking about, our time is so limited and so much that we have to crunch in to that visit, so that if we're able to provide tools to people where they can, if they have a concern or say they're concerned about their health or we are, go to your site, right, and take this online screening exam.
Institutions, organizations, and experts on all these different aspects of brain health where we can dive deeper into things like the mind diet. How does bullying impact the brain? So topics of interest, and people have an opportunity to engage, learn from the experts, engage with them, have that dialogue, and then find other people that they can contact if they're having concerns. So we're really in that resource and education space at virtualbrainhealthcenter.com. Hope that will be a valuable gift to your community and following as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Culler. It's been really a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.